Hello everyone, we are Skullduggery and here is our pitch for Full Beam, a driving horror game.
We hope you enjoyed the trailer. We're a small team of 3, and as you can see, we're 2 artists and 1 programmer.
At the start of the first term, we were a team of 6 and working on a different project called End of Winter. Unfortunately, for a multitude of reasons, we felt it would be best to dissolve and regroup for a more stable and scopable concept. Hey Ed, why don't you give us a wave?
Oi, Zach, make yourself known.
And Mika, of course. Our elevator pitch for Full Beam goes as follows. Full Beam is a first-person survival horror game, from the perspective of a driver lost in the countryside. The player navigates the blackened, mist-covered roads of a moorland, unaware that they have entered the territory of cryptids. These cryptids will attempt to enter the vehicle by any means. With Storm Lucas approaching, the player is under the clock to make their escape and reach safety. We've taken inspiration from the constricted feel of the office of Five Nights at Freddy's, and the mysterious nature of SCP Containment Breach's many creatures.
We also took inspiration from games that we feel were similar to the project we were aiming for, such as Beware and Dead End Road.
Being such a small group, we've had to broaden our skill sets for the diverse number of tasks that faced us. This diagram helps to portray the disciplines we've taken up to reach our end goal. Bear in mind that this diagram doesn't measure workload, as some disciplines were less substantial than others.
Our game features unique mechanics in an already underrepresented subgenre of horror games. The only other well-known driving horror game that's also 3D is Beware, and our project differs heavily from that. We believe that the strong visual design of Cat Eyes will help push the project and make it more popular, as has been proven in the past with classic mascot horror.
Our unique visuals will also help to fully immerse the player in our environment. For our market research, we've honed in on 2 particular genres of horror. These 2 groups are mascot horror and driving horror games. Five Nights at Freddy's is a fantastic example of mascot horror done right. The character designs are easily recognisable as they are terrifying. We believe that this subgenre is on the down curve. For example, the recent title of Garden of Banban, along with its sequels, is a simplistic, bug-riddled mess that doesn't do mascot horror justice.
The second key area of research that we looked into was driving horror games. As talked about before, Beware and Dead End Road are 2 examples of these. Beware is a game that features strong driving mechanics, however it didn't feel as scary as the kind of project we want to push forward.
And while Dead End Road is a very well executed and very scary game, it doesn't do the driving mechanic quite as realistically as we would have liked.
Due to the horror themes of our game, we're looking at a target audience of teens and young adults. Due to the horror tones of the game and the jump scares, it would be a PEGI 12. The game fills a niche in the horror genre that hasn't seen many entries. The game has simple and easy to understand controls, so this would make a very good first horror game for anyone wanting to play one. The game also features an inbuilt timer which gives the player an incentive to play again so they can try and beat their own time. It's important to note that our game isn't suitable for people with photosensitive epilepsy.
To be successful in our game, we have to focus on 3 main game pillars. The first one being its functional driving mechanics. This is to make the car feel as realistic as possible. The second one is the environment that the player is surrounded by. They must be able to move freely, but their world must also feel constrictive and dangerous. And the third and arguably most important is that this horror game must scare whoever plays it. We have given the player a simple objective, which is to get from point A to B. The driver, or player, must reach Ed's Gas, a petrol station located somewhere on the map. On top of this, they must avoid enemies and physical obstacles, but we will talk about these in later slides. It was important for our tutorial to be given both diegetically and visually. The main idea was to incorporate the radio into the car's mechanics, presenting a radio station weather broadcast to the player. This occurs in the spawn area and is accompanied by the keyboard controls as text on screen. For example, when the presenter mentions big cat sightings, it'll tell the player that they can toggle their headlights and also to check their back window. We decided to put narrative partially aside in development of Full Beam, hoping to keep it as foggy and ambiguous as the moor that the player finds themselves on. This demo features a mere 16th of the initial map concept. Our game map has been geographically captured from an area south of Bodmin Moor in Cornwall, but to keep within our scope, we have scaled it down drastically. We have 2 main roads that join at the east side, and side roads branching into the woodland in the centre. Our environment takes place on a bleak moorland somewhere in the countryside. We've made it intentionally very dark blue, accompanied by bright reds and greens. As an inverse to the general rule, green actually represents danger, whereas red is safety, as is the case with the red car that the player drives.
A big part of the environment design was having the player feel as though the vehicle that they're in is their last line of defense against the elements, so the storm adds an extra layer of ambience towards this feeling.
On top of this, we've shrouded the player in fog. This is our first cryptid. His name is Cat Eyes. They are the most common and most active threat. Inspired by SCP and AI-generated images of skeletons, Cat Eyes is always on the prowl for drivers on the road. He is especially angered by off-road driving. Anybody who does will be met by a quick death at the hands of Cat Eyes. He gets his name from his glowing green eyes, not too dissimilar from the cat eyes you'd find on an everyday road. Our second cryptid is Serble, a mysterious entity that takes the form of a patch of smog. Entering the smog will start a sort of timer. When that timer ticks down to 0, it will kill the player. However, if the player leaves the smog, the timer will stop. Every second counts in evading him. It incentivizes the player to leave the smog as soon as possible.
In the same way it was handled in Five Nights at Freddy's, our jump scares are pre-rendered animations that appear as a 2D overlay. This ensures that the player will always be able to see the jump scare and it cannot be missed. The vehicle's been modelled after a very traditional 4x4 SUV. As such, the physics reflect this. They're designed to feel slow, and the vehicle's relatively unresponsive due to it being old and the weather conditions being poor. Despite following a realistic physics model, it's virtually impossible to get the car stuck on its side, as certain physics of the vehicle have been tweaked to better reflect the gameplay we want to achieve. All of the vehicle sounds were recorded by me. I chose to record a vehicle that used a TD5 engine as it's got a very distinctive sound and is only used by 4x4 vehicles.
For sounds that we couldn't replicate, such as the storm sound effects, we used royalty-free sources. The jump scare sound effect was edited by me, and is actually the sound of a screaming cat. I believe audio to be one of the most important parts of making horror scary.
All of the tracks used during actual gameplay helped to encourage the feelings of fear that we were aiming for in our core pillars. Here are some examples of our promotional work, some of which have been used on our social media platforms.
An aspect of promotion that I wanted to delve into was the secret hidden messages in images. This was often done by Scott Cawthon on his website to promote upcoming FNAF games. In this way, we've done a similar thing for the title of the game. This image was the first post we made on Twitter, and when the image is brightened to 200%, it revealed the official name of the game. We are committed to making Full Beam a success. For this reason, Full Beam will remain in development until the list mentioned here is finally included. Notice the map that was mentioned earlier. Only the bottom right corner was used for this demo, and we have a much bigger and diverse environment planned. Another aspect we were really hoping to implement was the physics interaction for a window crank mechanic. Cat Eyes would try to get through the back window by pushing it down. We wanted the player to be able to crank the window back up and prevent his entry. On top of this, we wanted the radio system to be much more integrated into the functional mechanics. In this way, we wanted the environment to affect what we'd hear on the radio system. An even more major mechanic that never got implemented would be that the player was able to leave the car and walk around.
There'd also be a few randomized player encounters and events. One of the initial player encounters we planned was to have an animal run out into the road. This would then have the player prompted to leave the car, where they would find that the animal was missing.
Any questions?